Another of the steps in defining project scope is collecting requirements. This is the process of defining and documenting the stakeholders' need to meet the project objectives. To get a context perspective on where requirements fit, they are part of the effort to define scope. An overview of project scope can be found on the project scope video. I like to say that the list of project deliverables gives us a sketch of what we need to create, and then the requirements take that sketch and fill it in with color. When we did the video about the WBS, we talked about decomposing an airport using the work breakdown structure. And the airport decomposed into several top-level items, including a passenger terminal. We further decomposed the passenger terminal down into food service, and we decomposed food service into a number of items, including the food court. Then we decomposed the food court, and it included a number of things such as the burger restaurant, a pizza restaurant, a Mexican restaurant, etc. As an example for what we're about to do with requirements, let's take the burger restaurant and perceive that as a project by itself. A subset of the WBS for a burger restaurant would look like this. Now this is a subset of all the steps that we'd have for the restaurant, but enough to make our point. First of all, what we have here is we have both work package level and higher level deliverables. The deliverables that aren't fully decomposed, like storage and kitchen and marketing, are shown in blue. The items in red are fully decomposed deliverables, and as we said earlier, those are called work package level deliverables. And the work package level deliverables need to translate directly into requirements for our project. Let's take a look at WBS item 3.2, the grill. The requirement for 3.2 could be number 12 here. The kitchen grill appliance shall be installed. By itself, this requirement can't possibly work for us. As stated, we could go to a box store or a hardware store, purchase a charcoal grill for the least amount of money possible, put that in our kitchen, and have met the requirement. The requirement needs more specific. So typically we're going to break this high-level requirement down into some lower-level requirements. 1. The grill shall have a cook surface that is 28 inches deep. 2. The grill shall have a cook surface that is greater than or equal to 48 inches wide. 3. The grill cooking surface shall be 40 inches from the floor. 4. The grill shall use natural gas burners. 5. The grill should have 3 separate heat areas. 6. Each grill heat area should have a separate temperature control. 7. The grill shall have a stainless steel cook surface. 8. The cook surface shall be surrounded by trays to capture grease. 9. The grease capture trays shall flow into a metal containment vessel. Using more detailed requirements like these, we have a lot better picture of what's going to be necessary for our kitchen, and something like a cheap grill from a hardware store no longer fits the bill. Our more specific requirements have made us know exactly what we need to buy for our kitchen. So when I say the work breakdown structure deliverable is like a sketch, and the requirements fill color into that sketch, you can see what I mean here. We have a much better view of what this grill is supposed to be based on the detailed requirements than we ever could have had just looking at the deliverable and the work breakdown structure. So now that you know what requirements do for us, let's talk about how the PMBOK says we should organize our requirements efforts. The inputs are the project charter and the stakeholder register. The project charter has some starting points for my requirements. Things like measurable project objectives, the initial high-level requirements, high-level product description, and some of the milestones suggesting project schedule goals. We start here. Engaging the stakeholders is important because they know what we need to know. We're going to use a stakeholder register to identify which stakeholders can provide information on detailed project and product requirements. For those who are wondering, the stakeholder register is part of the communication plan, and the communication plan is part of a future video. So we've got our charter and our list of stakeholders. Now, how do we turn a list of stakeholder names into a collection of requirements? 6 of the 8 techniques that PMBOK tells us to use are all about doing this. We start with the simple act of talking to some of the stakeholders directly. This is typically done working off a list of prepared questions, but jumping into a spontaneous question when it makes sense is a good idea too. These interviews are normally done with a single stakeholder, but there might be more than one interviewer. These sessions will identify what the stakeholder believes the end result should be, but keep in mind this might or might not be in sync with what other stakeholders are looking for. At some future point, we'll have to work out the conflicts. We will also need to be sure that the scope of these requirements do not exceed other project constraints such as budget and time. We have a number of techniques that include multiple stakeholders. These include things like focus groups, facilitated workshops, questions and surveys, group creativity techniques, and group decision-making techniques. Focus groups. Focus groups bring pre-qualified stakeholders and subject matter experts together. A moderator facilitator will manage the session while the important discoveries are recorded by a scribe. The session, designed to be more of an interactive discussion than interview, is intended to learn about the attitudes and expectations of those in attendance with regard to the product, service, or intended project result. Facilitated workshops. These are focused sessions intended to bring key cross-functional stakeholders together in an effort to define and refine product requirements. These sessions are called facilitated workshops, and they are a primary technique for quickly defining cross-functional requirements. They are also useful for working out differences in stakeholder views, wants, and needs. When facilitated correctly, these sessions can build trust while fostering better communication and harmony, which results in increased stakeholder consensus. Group creativity techniques. Using techniques like idea mind mapping and brainstorming is another way to identify project requirements. Affinity diagrams, the Delphi technique, and nominal group techniques can be used to further refine the information collected, resulting in useful requirements information. Questionnaires and surveys. While group meetings and individual interviews are useful with the key stakeholders, questionnaires and surveys use a written set of questions designed to quickly accumulate information from a wide number of stakeholders. This is useful when quick turnaround is needed and when statistical analysis makes sense. Observations. If we view individuals in the environment and observe how they perform jobs, tasks, and processes, we can gain additional requirement information. Observation, often called job shadowing, is a situation where the user performs their normal tasks and an observer takes notes. This can also be done by a participant observer who does the job and documents the experience in an effort to discover the requirements. Prototypes. At some point in the requirements gathering process, a straw man or prototype can be created. This model is an educated guess of what the finished product result will be and allows stakeholders to experiment with a model of the final product. Through multiple generations of prototype creation, feedback, enhancement, and recreation, the requirements of what is actually wanted can be discovered and documented. Okay, so we start with the project charter and a list of stakeholders. We do interviews, group techniques, observation, and prototypes. Now what do we end up with? There are three outputs to this step: the requirements document, the requirements management plan, and the requirements traceability matrix. Let's talk about the requirements document. The requirements document may vary from one group to the next because it's driven by the project standards, but some of the things you might find include product requirements, business requirements, user requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, interface requirements, performance requirements, quality requirements, support requirements, training requirements. You also might find business rules guiding the organization, impacts to other areas and entities, assumptions that are related to the requirements, some mandated constraints, solution constraints, conflict resolution methods, and maybe some naming conventions and definitions. When we finish with all that, the output is a requirements document. The second output of requirements collection is a requirements management plan. It may touch on reporting, configuration management, and how requirement changes will be taken care of. It's possible that the plan will include some metrics and the rationale for using them. Requirements traceability matrix. Remember how my WBS had the grill at 3.2 and the requirements document listed them as 12? The requirements traceability matrix is a tool we use to keep all the different references connected because it's a table that links the requirements to their origin and traces them through the project lifecycle. To wrap this section up, I'd like to spend a little time talking about some of the attributes of a good requirement. Decide if you think this is a good requirement. The PMBOK tells us that a requirement must be specific, and for that reason this one fails. As you can see, this is more than one requirement. Besides the car having to have an engine, the engine must be 4 cylinders, and the engine must be fuel injected. Those 3 requirements actually beg a 4th requirement saying, if it's going to be fuel injected, is it injected with diesel fuel? Is it injected with gasoline? Maybe alcohol. So we have more than one requirement here, and if there's more than one requirement, it isn't specific and doesn't meet the criteria. Some of the other criteria that should exist for a good requirement is the requirement should be verifiable. That is, we should be able to measure it and we should be able to test it to make sure we've met the requirement. It should be achievable. If a requirement is science fiction, we can't achieve it and it's not good. It should be stable. That is to say, it can't change before you can achieve it. A requirement should be unambiguous. Like, for example, if we said the car must have a small engine, it's ambiguous. It should be appropriate. That is to say, it would add value. A requirement should be complete. It should have sufficient detail so that there's no guesswork. A requirement needs to be traceable. Consistent. By consistent, we mean it's not in conflict with other requirements. It should be understandable. It should also be acceptable to all the key stakeholders. And finally, a requirement should have its source identified. So there you have it, an overview of collecting requirements. Collecting requirements, along with the work breakdown structure and the scope document, is going to take us a great deal of the way toward fully understanding and communicating what the project is going to accomplish.